Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much, Judy, for your witty remarks and warming up the proceedings, and you, Mark, for setting the stage here at the TSRC. Okay, so without much ado, because I'm against the clock, I'm going to speak about engines through the ages. And, well, you mentioned the wheel. Let's start with it. So this particular wheel is one of the so-called 6 simple machines, the others being the lever, the pulley, the screw, the wedge, and something called the inclined plane. This one is over 4,000 years old. Fast forward to the steam engine, or about 300 and something years. And I will go through the electric, the internal combustion, the diesel engine, and on to the jet engine, rockets, biological motors. That was a long time ago, of course, but only recently well understood. And then my own love, these molecular artificial motors. And let's keep the stage open for the young people to go and anybody else in the audience beyond. Okay, let's start with trains and steam engines. Each of these you'll see a functioning object, of course lifted from the web, but this first one in the bottom left-hand corner is one of James Watt's, and he was a Scotsman. Early inventions back in 1765, so even before this country was born. Here is one from the state of Pennsylvania that has been used for many years in the drilling of oil. And then eventually they were put on wheels, and here is the famous 1829 Stephenson's rocket, which you can see in the Science Museum in London. And again, because of my heritage, here's the 1923 variety of the Flying Scotsman that cut the journey between London and Edinburgh down to 6 hours. And then on the west coast in Oregon, here's one that's been going for over a century, but now, of course, it's there to transport tourists. Electric motors. Again, where did it begin? Well, Faraday was early in the game. In 1821, he was able to show that you could transfer or transmute electrical energy into mechanical energy. And this is one of these flying wheel or spokes that is the first, in fact, electric motor invented by a Hungarian, János Jedrzej, and it still works to this day. Here is one that was a present from James Joule to Lord Kelvin in 1842. And of course, as was mentioned by Judy, we're using these contraptions all the time, and we'll soon be driving around in electric cars. But before we get there, let's go to trains that are activated in this way. And here you see, and there's going to be quite a bit of sound in my presentation, the trains that, and this must sink into people in the Western world. China, in a few years, has connected 60 cities the size of New York with trains like this.
The Beijing to Shanghai high-speed train has even clocked in speeds up to 480 kilometers an hour. That's about 300 miles an hour.
Think about it. Internal combustion engine. Here is actually a patent that was drawn up by Otto Langen in 1863, and within a few years he had turned it into an operating machine. And there you see a 4-cylinder one. Here is the famous Ford T. From 1908 to 1928, the Ford Motor Company produced almost 17 million of these. And this was the car that opened up that kind of transport to the ordinary person. And then, on a lighter note, Fraser drives a Toyota Camry. It's the 2011 version. And of course, in recent times, it's well cosseted with its reserved parking spot at Northwestern. Diesel. This is interesting. I learned that the name comes from a person, this German inventor, Rudolf Diesel. And his first diesel engine goes back to 1893. And to have a more modern variety, they are the ones that are really massive. This one you're looking at in 2006 generates over 100 horsepower and is destined to go into a cargo ship, I guess. Jet engines. Well, the name of Sir Frank Whittle is associated with jet engines almost exclusively. And here you see Lockheed Martin's F-22 Rapier taking off in 1997. At the same time as just a few months ago, landing at Heathrow is this commercial plane, Boeing 787, which had made the journey from Perth in Australia to London, which is some 9,000 miles in 17 hours. Quite a record. Now, here's something that blows the mind. At any one instant in time, there are 12,000 of these contraptions now in the air. And if you put 200 people in each of them, the calculation comes out that there's 2.5 million people, almost half the population of Scotland, up there at 33,000 feet. Amazing. Rocket engines. Well, it was a sad beginning, because this was 1944 and the German war machine was launching the V2s on London and Liège and Antwerp with, of course, a lot of cost of life. In more recent times, 1969 saw the launching of Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. But I guess close to me is the first woman astronaut, Helen Sharman, because, you know, we live in a village. She was one of my organic chemistry tutees at the University of Sheffield, and she was on the first mission, a Mir station mission in 1991, which was up for, I think, 8 days, courtesy of the Russians. So there is Helen. And now, again, very recently, I think in March, SpaceX showed the landing of this particular rocket, a Falcon. Biological motors. Well, here you see kinesin walking along a protein. It's a motor protein. And our bodies are absolutely full of these, carrying cargoes. And they need energy, and this energy comes from a little motor that is sited in what's called the mitochondria in our cells, in the cell membranes. And it is a motor which is driven by a flux of protons. And in one direction, it takes something called adenosine diphosphate and converts it into adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. And ATP is the fuel energy in our bodies. And all of us in the room who are in adulthood are amazingly generating 40 kilograms, or thereabout, half our body weight of ATP every day. Of course, we're using it as quickly as we are generating it. But what I'm going to show you now, the people at Wimbledon are obviously generating a lot more, probably about a ton of ATP. All right, so that's the background. One slide on definition. What are catenanes and ritaxanes? Well, I call the two of them for short mechanically interlocked molecules, or MIMS. It's always good to have a three-letter acronym with a vowel in the middle. Okay? A ritaxane comes from Latin rota, a wheel, axis and axle. And catenane likewise, catena, a chain. So it was starting in 1978, and I have to say, I was going to give up academic life it had been so unkind to me during my first decade in Sheffield, I sought refuge and went to the ICI corporate lab. And believe it or not, this is where I found one of the building blocks for our molecular machines, namely paraquat, a wipeout lead killer. And we had to find something, because this is deficient in electrons, that was full of electrons, and so this so-called dimethoxynaphthalene derivative served the purpose. So these two became mates for the rest of my academic life. In 1985, we found out how to put paraquat into a red ring, how to put blue into red. A few years later, and notice the progress was slow. In 1988, we did it the opposite way around in terms of what we call molecular recognition. We put red into blue. And having done that, we had to be able to make what became known as the little blue box. It was very inefficient without a template. You see this image, cartoon of a template up in the right-hand corner. But of course, once you've made it using a template, you have to take the template out. So there's the little blue box. The next thing was, and this was maybe the high point in many ways of my career, was the making of a 2-catenane in 1989. So that was using a ring as a template. And this was not only exciting because we had made it, but because we were able to unearth 3 motions. One that's very fast, rocking, another one which is of intermediate speed, about 2,000 times a second, called pirouetting. And they can be clockwise or anti-clockwise, there's no control. And then the third one, which is the slowest one, 30 times a second. I call this circumrotating just to have terms to differentiate them. And I'll just say parenthetically, this particular movement in a modified version found its way into a lot of our molecular electronic devices that we built with the help of Jim Heath at UCLA during my time there. Then, what we could do with catenanes, we should surely be able to do with ritaxanes, and so we could. Maybe less efficiently to begin with, but we could make them. And then the interesting thing here was, if I stretch out the dumbbell component, as we call it, you could watch this ring moving back and forward by spectroscopic means in solution 2,000 times a second. And it was in this publication, in the Journal of the American Chemical Society, where I used the term molecular machine for the first time. And it was only after one hell of a battle with the editor. He was all for, "It's hype, Fraser, take it out." No, it wasn't hype. So we desymmetrized the original molecular shuttle and put in a group that liked the blue ring 4 times more than the red one. So this gave us a non-degenerate molecular shuttle, but it also gave us a molecular switch, because that green unit, we could take and put a proton on it, give it a positive charge. You'll notice the ring has a positive charge 4 times over. And so physics comes to our aid, and the ring escapes to the red side. And we need to add base in order to bring it back to the green side. And then a fortuitous discovery at Northwestern in 2010, something that could have been discovered years previously, was could we put paraquat inside the blue box? And it was so counterintuitive. Why would we even consider taking something with 2 positive charges and putting it inside something with 4 positive charges? Physics tells you it's not going to happen. But what we can do is kill half of these charges and create what is called a radical. And that's shown by these dots. And these dots love each other enough to pair up and give us a radical complex. And this has then ultimately been used to make what's called a ratchet. And this is where you show, in energy terms, the movement of a ring that comes on over the neutral green end on the left-hand side and proceeds after reduction, once the charges have been reduced, and it changes its shape a little bit, over the positive end. So this is unidirectional motion, which you need to make some of the molecular machines. And you'll notice the images that I'm using, that lock and key indicates molecular recognition if the key is in the lock. If it's out, you've switched off the recognition. Obviously, V plus is electricity with positive voltage. V minus is with negative voltage. And this led ultimately, very recently, in 2015, to the making of a molecular pump, which is a real machine. It's a machine because we prevent the rings from escaping back into solution. And they build up on a collecting chain as a result of this juggling about with oxidation and reduction, changing the charges and so on and so forth. And the green component here is a very important one. We call it a speed bump. And it serves, and you'll see this the second time round, two functions. It takes about an hour and a half for this ring to go over, but when the next one wants to come on, this first one wants to come back, and so we've got to stop it. So an enormous amount of intellectual thought on the part of the students has to go into this design. And now, and I'll talk about this, I guess, on Thursday at our workshop here, we're trying to pump rings onto polymers in large numbers. We're not there yet, but we're well on the road. Well, effectively, that's my story, but I have a recall, which is coming up, to some music. But before we go there, I want to pay homage to Dutch co-laureate Ben Veringa. We were expecting him to be here, and he did not use the mechanical bond to build his machines. He used a particular type of double bond, and he was able to use light and heat to spin one part of a molecule in a particular direction with respect to another part. And I better put up my timeline now just to indicate that the blue is that period during which no one is thinking of doing it, and then the green is the sort of development period. And you can see, as we go down, that it's moving from the left to the right. The biological scene is different, of course. We were in complete ignorance about how our motors worked until only a few years ago, partly thanks to the late Paul Boyer from UCLA. McGill is in the audience, who actually just passed away, one of the oldest, I think, Nobel laureates, at 99, within 6 weeks of his 100th birthday at the beginning of this month. And then the ones I love, the molecular ones. And you'll see there's not much in the way of purple yet. Applications beckon, and we'll address that later, I think, but the field is wide open for the young people to get involved. So here's the music, I think, finally, that I promised you.
Le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. C'est payé. Mes chagrins, mes plaisirs, je n'ai plus besoin de balayer les amours avec leur trémolo, balayer pour toujours. Je repars à zéro. Non, rien de rien. Rien, ni le bien qu'on m'a le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. C'est payé. Allumer le feu, mes chagrins, mes plaisirs, je n'ai plus besoin de balayer les amours avec leur trémolo, balayer pour toujours, je repars à zéro. Non, rien de rien. Rien, ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien, car ma vie, car mes jours, ça commence avec toi.
Okay, so one or two final comments. Research is not fast, particularly in chemistry. I'm talking about 50 years for this to unfold. It's also done not by me alone. In fact, very little of it is. It's done by over 500 people like you, Unity, graduate students, postdocs, from 50 different countries. Diversity is incredibly important because science is global and science knows no boundaries. So I hope I get over the spirit of the family aspect in the laboratory. But it extends also to the meeting places like this, where you meet people on a usually annual or biannual basis with whom, in a sense, you're competing with. But most of the time, for me, it was just fun and collaborating with these wonderful people, my co-laureates, and also the younger people and other people who've contributed in a big way to this field. Thank you.